Okay. So tonight we are talking about vernal pools. We're going to talk a little bit about what they are and why they're important, but we'll also get into the nitty-gritty of how to protect them. As is so often the case, behind every wonderful natural resource, there is often a complex array of mechanisms behind the scenes to protect them. And we'll dive into that a bit tonight and explore some innovation that's being piloted in both Topsham and Vernal. The timing is great because we're all listening to and enjoying the calls of our amphibian friends who need vernal pools to breed. So we'll start with Aram and Jessica. They are going to provide some context about vernal pools and the human dimensions that affect their protection. Aram Calhoun is Professor Emerita of Wetland Ecology in the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Conservation Biology at the University of Maine. Her research focuses on the conservation of wetlands with a focus on vernal pools. She's particularly interested in conservation of natural resources on private lands and collaborative approaches to wetland conservation through locally driven initiatives. And Jessica Spelke-Johnsowicz is Research Assistant Professor in the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Conservation Biology, and is also a faculty fellow at the George Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions at UMO. Her current research focuses on the human dimensions of natural resources with an interest in stakeholder engagement and transdisciplinary research. Before we jump into Aram and Jess, I'm just going to introduce the other four folks who are going to be sharing some comments after Jess and Aram. Angela Twitchell is Executive Director of Brunswick-Topsham Land Trust, which administers the conservation program portion of the SAMP program in Topsham. And you'll hear the term SAMP, which stands for Special Area Management Program. SAMP is much easier to say, so we're going to use that. Hold on, I'm just going to admit a few more people here.
So Aram is also in the waiting room, Caroline.
She got, I think she should, she's back with us now.
Okay, thank you.
That's good. Rod Melanson is Topsham's town planner and oversees the SAMP program in Topsham. Liz Hertz is a conservation consultant who helped develop the SAMP while working as a wetlands policy specialist with the State Planning Office. And Jim Howard is president and CEO of Priority Real Estate Group. He's a past board member of the Finance Authority of Maine and TDI, Topsham's Economic Development Group, and he was also involved in development of the SAMP tool. And Jim is joining us by phone, so you won't see him, but he is with us. So with that intro, why don't you take it away, Aram?
Great, thank you. And I'm glad I got let in. It's nice to have all you people participating. We're excited about that. So some reason my slides are, okay. So this is a really good time of year. Obviously, many of you already have amphibians going to your pools. I know Jim Howard is very excited about this time of year. His heart was stolen by spotted salamanders. So what we're going to do tonight, if I can advance my slides, is give you a quick definition of vernal pools, because I realize not everybody may have them on their front burner. So we'll quickly go over what they are, why they're a little bit challenging to conserve, and then we end positively with a way forward. We're going to, as a team, introduce you to the Vernal Pool Special Area Management Plan, which is a conservation tool that we'll tell you about. And then Jessica will be talking about next steps to implementation of that tool and how we can make it go more smoothly for towns. So quickly, a vernal pool is an ephemeral small wetland. The key is that there are no breeding fish, no breeding bullfrogs or green frogs, because this provides a unique breeding habitat for species that can't tolerate these predators. So the vernal pools fill in spring now with snow melt or with excessive rain, and they generally dry down by summer's end. And this keeps them fishless, and it keeps down the predators that you see in permanent ponds. And that they support creatures like this fairy shrimp. Their whole life cycle takes 6 weeks, and they're delicious to everybody. So they try to finish their life cycle before there's a lot of other animals in the pool. The wood frogs, which if you go out at dusk and drive down the roads, you may hear this quacking. You might think it's ducks, but it's actually the wood frogs starting their breeding event. Spotted salamanders, I'm sure all of you have run over some of them on spring nights. Angela apparently has, she's making a face. And blue spotted salamanders. So those are our vernal pool amphibians that like to breed in vernal pools, although we do find them in other places. So why vernal pools? What if you don't like amphibians? They're slimy and some people think they're really creepy. Well, there's a lot of other forest functions for vernal pools, which are scattered all around our forests. One very important one is carbon import and export. Just think of all these animals as organic sugar, and they supply nutrients to a wide range of animals. And you can see the ones in yellow here are ones that people who like to hunt would be interested in. And all of these animals frequent vernal pools. They provide a fast food oasis for dining in. Here's a barred owl taking a spotted salamander out of a pool. I did not take this picture, but I had this happen in my pool this year. A barred owl swooped down, picked out a wood frog, not a spotted salamander, and flew away. And I now have broad-winged hawks all around my pool. There's also fast food takeout if you don't wish to dine in. My students had radio transmitters on a lot of these frogs, and we had beeping garter snakes, beeping hawks, because they swallow the frog and the transmitter. So we know that there's a lot of flow between the forests and the vernal pools, a lot of energy exchange. So before we go into the management guidelines, I just want you to know we don't have time tonight, but there's 25 years or more of research behind these management strategies. We've had people looking inside vernal pools to see what the best habitat for the different vernal pool species are. Sorry. Hello? Are you still hearing me? Just nod. Okay, that was not someone talking to me. This is Dawn Morgan, who is exploring wood frog breeding habitat. And we also have a big body of research looking at what happens to animals on their way to breed to the pools, and where the adults and juveniles of all the species go after their breeding. And we do know that they spend 95% of their life history in the forest outside of the pool, and they're only in the pool for 2 or 3 weeks each season. So there are diverse habitats that are needed by these animals: uplands, forested wetlands, other vernal pools, and other wetlands. And every species and age class needs something a little bit different. Already you're getting the idea that this is not an easy habitat to conserve with a simple rule. We got most of our data by putting transmitters on wood frogs or transmitters in salamanders and following them around the landscape and seeing where they summer, where they hibernate, how they migrate. So the science-informed lessons that we have, which helped us to put together the SAMP, is that these animals are traveling farther than we would probably like them to in terms of being able to conserve them. You can see the distances here. They're traveling hundreds of feet from breeding pools, and that's only the adults. We do know that the juveniles can travel miles from a pool. We know that they have complex habitat needs. So just take the wood frog. In our area, they like to summer in forested wetlands, they breed in vernal pools, and they overwinter in upland forests. So it's a complex habitat to pull all together in one regulation. We know from studies in urban environments that lawns lack sufficient migration cover. So things that homeowners can do is put forest rows or tree rows to appropriate forests. We know that lawn chemicals and lawn mowers and sewer drains are not good things. And there's a lack of upland hibernation sites, because usually what's left over in a strong development is the forested wetlands, which are not hibernation sites. So we know that there are these challenges. More and more, we're getting pictures of bloated wood frogs. I don't know if any of you have seen them. We think it's a salt issue. There's more salt been applied to roads because of icing. So it has implications for locomotion and for disease. There's increased incidences of mortality events by rising temperatures and by being more susceptible due to pollution. We have climate change issues to be concerned about. I particularly, more than the breeding pools, I worry these days about snowpack in the forest. These animals hibernate just above the leaf litter, and we've had a lot of freeze and thaws in the winter, and that results in animals freezing, thawing, coming out, heading to breeding pools, and then it freezes solid again and they die. We also have unpredictable drought and the timing of drought. Last year, this is from last year, one of my very productive pools dried out right in the beginning of the spring, and then we had more rain than we knew what to do with all summer. So we're having a lot of unpredictability in hydrology. So challenges to protecting these small pools, you're probably already thinking, the complex habitat needs, it's too much and they go too far. So how are we going to deal with this issue? We're very concerned as the habitat fragmentation with, you see the wood frog here in its summer habitat, and then the intervening forest for migration, and then overwintering habitat in a vernal pool. And increasingly we're filling these areas with houses. So how do we match human development with the land that they need? Well, that's where our team that worked for 7+ years, all of the people that you see their faces here were part of that team. Pool plus forest, connecting landscapes. So we've come to believe that putting little circles around pools isn't working so well anymore, that we actually need to think about a pool plus forest paradigm. So current regulations, and mind you, the federal regulations are a moving target, but there is still a potential consideration of 750 foot around a vernal pool, but only if there are other wetland impacts to a project. And that's all under review now as well. In the state, it's still a state permit for a zone of 250 feet around a pool. And that's just a permit. It's not a no build zone. So you can think about the distances that we've talked about these animals traveling and see that these animals have no regard for the law and they're going way outside their boundaries. So what do we do with that? The other issue is that the significant vernal pool legislation, which is that 250 foot zone of consultation, only has turned out to apply to 20% of all pools that go to the state. So clearly that's just a drop in the bucket in terms of vernal pool conservation in the state of Maine. So we have good news. We have all this bad news, but the good news is that we have regulations and the federal government does still pay attention to vernal pools, and that it has put it on the radar screen. The other good news is that no one was actually particularly happy with the way the regulations were working. Developers were frustrated because they had to listen to two different sets of regulations. The biologists were frustrated because they're seeing little circles go around pools and pools eventually becoming urban wetlands and not vernal pools. So we've done a couple of things. We've had a community vernal pool mapping program. You see the towns here. Maybe you're in one of the towns that had this done from 2008 to 2011. So these towns have a digital base of where the vernal pools are, and assessments were done on properties that allowed us access. But it sort of sat in the closet unless there was a planning board meeting, and it wasn't really a proactive way to conserve pools, and it didn't address the landscape scale issues. So this working group, a 7-year endeavor of over 100 meetings with probably a core of 25 people, met and developed this special area management plan for vernal pools. And that a special area management plan is a tool that the Army Corps of Engineers invokes, and it's used for managing sensitive resources. It considers economics, which is vitally important to our towns, and it includes policies and mechanisms for implementation. And we are the only vernal pool SAMP in the country at this point. So we're very invested in making this a success. Part of our success is who was at the table. You can see the regular agencies, the towns, land trust ecologists, interested citizens. But in orange, you see people that aren't generally at the table with us ecologists to solve problems, and that's the economists and the developers and the planning consultants. They are probably the most important people that helped build this from the bottom up. It's a new approach that's local, and I call it eco-based because it takes into account economies of towns and ecology, houses for both things. It's predictable, flexible, proactive, and I might add that it's voluntary, which is really important, a voluntary mitigation tool. It is not a law, and the regular laws are the default if someone doesn't want to participate. So know that ahead of time when I'm explaining what a town can do. So the legal authority for implementation of this special area management plan is through the main general permit of the Army Corps. As you know, we have home rule here, and towns can receive partial delegated authority from Maine DEP. You have to apply to that. Topsham and Orono have completed that process and successfully navigated that. And then town ordinances have to be passed that say that the town would like to have the SAMP available for landowners. A land trust receives the money from the developer. We'll get into that, and they find willing landowners to serve as conservation targets. And I'll show you what that looks like. So a developer can develop in the growth zone in a designated development area. It's usually a subset of the growth zone where there are services and where there's infill needed so that we don't fuel sprawl. The developer pays a fee. That fee goes to the municipality, and the land trust receives the fee to give to a rural landowner in exchange for a conservation easement or some sort of in perpetuity protection of vernal pools plus forest. So, and if the municipality or the land trust cannot find someone to use that money, there's no liability to the town. That money after 3 years goes back to the statewide in lieu fee program. This is more like a local in lieu fee program. So a town, this is a town in a rural area and a growth area. The pools are in blue. A developer goes into a subset of the growth area, can impact any vernal pool without knowing whether it's significant or not. And any vernal pool that's in the development, there is a fee structure laid out in the SAMP I won't get into today. That fee is the money that will be used by a land trust to identify a local landowner who is willing to join this program in the rural area. Now that's a plus because for every single pool, this is the formula and it's flexible, but we would get 2 pools and 70 acres. So you can see a pool on the left. It's in a growth area or an infill area, which will completely surround the pool. It will make a lovely urban wetland, but it is not a functioning vernal pool. In return, I do remember in early meetings, Angela was all excited because the areas where we had picked out target pools were areas that the land trust had picked out as green areas. So, you know, this seed money or this operation helps land trusts to meet their mission of green spaces that are connected. And it's perfect for a landscape scale approach to vernal pool conservation. So community outcomes are more certainty and predictability for both the landowner and for the developer. Compact development, because we're not making it available in the whole growth zone, but in designated development areas where there's infill and services. It supports municipal visions for rural lands. It provides remuneration for landowners in the rural zone. We have lots of people were anti-vernal pools because it felt like a takings of profitable use of their lands, and that helps address that. And importantly to me, it conserves pools in a landscape context that will allow for wildlife conservation. Think of all those things that use the pools and use corridors to and from the pools. So it's not really just vernal pool conservation, it's maintaining wild connected areas where ecosystem processes can play out, where plants can adapt to climate change, and where animals can move around. That's the all-important conserving connectivity. Land trusts already knew about this concept a long time ago. That was a very fast presentation because we have other people presenting. So I want to direct you to Of Pools and People. You'll see that there is a SAMP button, more about the SAMP, and it has a PowerPoint about what the SAMP is. It has the document that our team put together. It's sort of a cookbook of how to, and it also has all the templates for documents that you would need to apply for a delegated authority or an ordinance template, all sorts of things like that. So please go to that webpage. I'm going to turn it now over to my colleague, Jessica Jansowitz. We've had this tool for a long time, and we have yet a project to go through, and Jess is going to talk about that. We're hopefully we can get going post-COVID. It's not really post-COVID, but we might be opening up again to make some progress. And Jess, you take it away from here. And she talks faster than I do, so get ready. Put your seatbelts on.
I'm getting her unmuted.
Thank you. It wasn't letting me unmute.
Sorry about that.
No, thank you, Caroline. All right. Well, first, thank you for having us. Let me just remove the chat. We really appreciate the opportunity to not only share what's really cool from the ecology perspective of vernal pools, but also to share a little bit of our human dimensions work. Because as you know, you can sit around the table and come together, have a lot of buy-in on this tool. And as Aram said, it took 7 years with lots of folks around the table to create and craft this tool. But a tool only works if it's implemented successfully. So our work moving forward really focused on that. We wanted to understand what are the challenges and what are the opportunities for implementing the SAMP. And we wanted to understand how to implement the SAMP in diverse community contexts. We know not all Maine towns and Maine communities are the same, with the same priorities, the same capacities, and the same needs. And we wanted to learn how to improve communications with rural landowners. As you know from Aram's description, landowner participation is key to the success of the SAMP, as well as land trust participation and town participation. And so we really wanted to learn in implementing the SAMP how we could all work together, not only to identify what some of those capacities and needs are, but understand who's the best messenger to help share information about the SAMP, what types of tools and resources do they need to help communicate about the SAMP and help to implement it successfully. And so we were fortunate enough to have some support through a couple of different entities on the campus, through the Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions and through a National Science Foundation National Research Trainee program, which trains graduate students in trying to do transdisciplinary stakeholder engaged work. And so we had a lot of great support. And so it provided a great opportunity for us to move forward to understand what some of the challenges and opportunities were for implementing the SAMP. And we had 2 towns, Orono and Topsham, that were willing to help us, 2 of the towns that were delegated and 2 of the towns that are here with us today to help us understand some of these opportunities. And what I wanted to do is, I've been actually very fortunate. I've been working with Aram since 2007, and we've done a lot of work in the past, and that work's been really important in forming our work going forward. So I wanted to step back for a minute and share some of what we've learned from our previous research that's really helped inform the SAMP rollout as we move forward. So the next few series of slides is actually based on some work that I did just looking at general perceptions of vernal pools to understand what it is that people care about, what their information needs are related to vernal pools, and what their concerns are. And so the next few slides just share some of the responses that we learned through this research. And so one of the landowners that we asked them, general perceptions of vernal pools, and this one landowner says, "It does its thing, and I respect that. I know enough to leave it alone. I don't need someone else to tell me what to do. I can't do something, that's all." Sorry, my phone is ringing here, so sorry about that. And there was also economic concerns. Landowners were concerned that if a vernal pool was identified on their property, that they wouldn't be able to build on their property, and it would cost them money. And if it couldn't build on a house lot, this one landowner said, if this goes vernal pool, it could cut me out of a house lot, 30,000 or even 50,000. And so the next slide, also what landowners were concerned about, even like in the first couple of slides, if a landowner, knew enough to leave it alone, maybe wasn't interested in developing, they were still concerned about what it meant if they wanted to go sell their property. So again, economic concerns. And then the last one, it's not about vernal pools. A lot of landowners really liked the frogs. They liked the salamanders. They liked the birds that came to their vernal pools. But they said, I can feel the fingers of government creeping in to take more away from the landowners. So they were more fearful or concerned about sort of the incremental regulations that were placed on their properties. And so based on a lot of our previous work, we understood, as researchers, we identified this gap where we understood that because vernal pools are found predominantly on private lands, that landowner participation is key to success. But from those quotes, you could also understand that landowner decision-making is multifaceted, where a landowner might think that the vernal pool on their property is actually pretty cool, and again, might be aesthetically pleasing to them, but they're worried about what it meant for them economically, whether they stayed on their property, whether they sold their property. And there was just a lot of uncertainty about what happens if a vernal pool was identified on their property. And so the challenge was trying to overcome some of the misunderstandings, the lack of knowledge, or our lack of being able to communicate with different types of landowners. And so we really saw this as an opportunity to communicate with landowners. And so one of the things that as researchers, we realized is that we really needed to develop better ways to improve our communications with the SAMP stakeholders, not only the landowners, but the land trusts that we're working with in the towns as well. But interestingly and excitingly for us, that we weren't just researchers on the University of Maine campus saying, we've figured out your problem and we're going to fix it, but our stakeholders also said the same thing. And they said, we are having a challenge communicating with our landowners what the SAMP is and how they can use it and how it might fit with their land ownership objectives and their priorities. So we were pleased to see that our identified gap also fit the needs of our stakeholders. And so we went about trying to develop a landowner communication plan, and we did what any good professors do. We went to our students and we asked them for help. And we said, here is our challenge. We need to figure out a way to communicate what the SAMP is to different and diverse audiences, to different diverse communities, and we need your help. And so they came up with a plan for us. And they said, well, you need to start by just talking to folks. Find out what their concerns are. What are their information needs? How do they want to get information from you? And have these exploratory, informal dialogues, particularly with landowners and particularly with landowners in rural areas. The other things they suggested to us were information sessions and focus groups, which I will talk a little bit about later. Unfortunately, COVID kind of came in the way of some of our plans, but we did get a chance before COVID to do some of these exploratory dialogues. So I wanted to just share with you some of the preliminary things that we were learning about the SAMP rollout from the perspective of the landowners. Okay, sorry, a little more animation then. I should say, back up for a sec. The lines were saying that as we learned through our exploratory dialogues, we were sharing the information that we were learning back iteratively and consistently with the towns that we were working with to get their feedback as well, because it was really important that we adjusted our questions based on what we were learning and that we also shared what we were learning with our partners. Okay, so just to share some of the preliminary feedback that we were getting from landowners and about how to communicate with them and what their questions and concerns and information needs were. Not surprisingly, their first questions were about resale value. If I engage in the SAMP, what does that mean for the value of my property? Do I get a tax benefit if I enroll in the SAMP? There were a lot of questions, not surprisingly, about easements and easement restrictions. You know, if I enroll into the SAMP program, what does that mean for my property? Will I be able to still collect firewood? What can I do? The in perpetuity issue was also brought up a lot by the landowners that we talked to. They also wanted to know who the third party was. I think you heard from Aram, who was saying that the land trusts were the ones to hold the easements. Some of the other questions that they had were about the steps in the process. You know, where can they go to find more information if they're interested? What comes first? What do they need to do? And then interestingly, once we started talking about the SAMP, they became kind of curious and wanting to know, what does it take for my land to qualify to be enrolled into the SAMP? And then funding mechanisms were another question that they asked about. So some of the other things they were concerned about, we were still hearing echoes of what we had learned earlier from our landowner interviews. Still the concern that they felt like if they enrolled in a program like the SAMP, does that mean that they're giving up acreage to frogs and salamanders? And this idea of if they enrolled and they put their land into an easement, and that idea it echoed again those comments about, what will happen if I want to sell my property to somebody else? And they were concerned that they would bind the hands of the next owner if they enrolled into the SAMP program. And again, this reflection of like, well, I really like my vernal pool, but I really don't have a use for the SAMP because I already know how to manage my land. And we found that a lot of private landowners already worked with foresters and other consultants on their property and just didn't feel perhaps the need to enroll into the SAMP. And then those who weren't interested in developing as well, the same sort of feeling that they're not going to develop, there's no need for the SAMP. So again, this really harkens back to this idea that we need to figure out how better to communicate these options to let, give landowners a better idea of what the SAMP is, how it might match their priorities and landowner needs, even if they don't plan to develop, or if they already have a forester or other expert who's helping them manage their land, how the SAMP can really still fit in with their needs, their interests, and their current management priorities. And this is just to say that a lot of what we were finding about sort of misperceptions or misunderstanding or just not having information, or we're not providing the information in a way that's accessible and useful for folks, is something that we do often find in the literature as well in looking at the factors influencing landowner views of conservation easements. And we found that a lot of support for what we were thinking in terms of our landowner communication plan, and that we needed to think about ways to create and communicate flexibility with landowners and potential landowners that might be interested in the SAMP, and that building relationships is really important, and not just building relationships with landowners, but building relationships with landowners, land trusts, and municipal officials. And then the last one is about this idea of building relationships, but also working to fit the SAMP priorities and SAMP goals already in with existing goals of the landowner and the towns. So just to share some of the gems that we also learned from these conversations, because we asked them, okay, well, what do we do next? How do we communicate with you? How do we communicate with your neighbors? And we learned some real gems from these landowners. And the first was, may seem obvious to those who are rural landowners perhaps, but that rural landowners like to be rural landowners because they like the quiet, they like to be farther, they like to have their distance from neighbors. And so maybe they're not as connected as those that live in town and are constantly bumping elbows with their neighbors and walking from place to place. Also, rural landowners may have different ways to access information and different methods of communication. We were trying to understand, do they go to their local library? How often are they coming into town for information? And when they do, who are they asking information of? And so that's where we learned how important it was to choose the right messenger, to make sure that the folks who are interacting with the different landowners are interacting with trusted sources of information. And the challenge there is it's often different for different landowners. For some landowners, it's the consulting forester who's working on their lands. For other landowners, it's their neighbors. For some landowners, they feel very comfortable walking into their municipal building and talking to their town planners. The next really awesome gem we found out was meeting landowners where they are. Ram and I had conversations in coffee shops, and we went to landowners' homes and chatted with them about where could we meet up next. And we got some really great ideas. Unfortunately, the pandemic stalled those, and I'll talk about those in a bit. And then lastly, something that I've said several times now is really trying to match landowner objectives. Some landowners really want to enhance their property for wildlife, and we can talk about how the SAMP may be able to do that. Some landowners want to keep open space, and we can talk about how the SAMP might be able to do that. And so we found, Aram and I often like to say, is that we kind of take one step forward and 3 steps back in our work as we learn more from those that we're engaging with. And so the first thing that we learned was how to identify and engage with trusted sources. And so some of the things that we did, as I said, a lot of times landowners prefer to work with their trusted advisors. So we did go to a technical workshop and try and share some information there. The other things that we did were figure out better ways to address landowner questions and information needs, and that the kind of challenges of communicating really surfaced around conservation easements and understanding those better. And then providing information so that it's clear and easily accessible to landowners. And so some of the things that we thought about doing in meeting landowners where they are, we were developing a potluck. It didn't turn out to be a winter potluck, but we had tried to develop, we had all the planning stages done and then COVID hit. So we're still trying to reinvigorate that. We're trying to reinvigorate library programs. So again, diverse ways to interact with landowners, amphibian crossing, big nights. And we have an awesome graduate student that just came on board and is going to be working with the towns as well to help us, again, be our ears on the ground, listen, try and understand how we can better communicate not only with the landowners, but the land trusts and the towns, and help to share information. And so with that, I think we can open it up to questions unless I missed anything wrong.
That's great.
I'm going to ask, I want to ask our other four folks to just jump in with sort of their perspective on the process. And I think I'm going to sort of go in order of, I was thinking about asking Liz first to, Liz was involved in the group that put together the SAMP tool. And Liz, do you want to just say a few words about your perception of the process? And
I do, Caroline. Thanks very much. And thanks to CREA for this opportunity. I want to clear up something. As you have probably figured out, the SAMP is a complicated mechanism. It has a lot of moving parts, and there are a lot of players involved in it. Landowners cannot join the SAMP. The way the SAMP works as a developer, a town has adopted, gone through the process with the Department of Environmental Protection and received delegated authority to issue vernal pool permits in their designated growth area. And the designated growth area is a vehicle that was developed in the SAMP, but it represents a part of a town's growth area that they've identified in their comprehensive plan. So now the town is the regulating authority, so to speak, for vernal pool permits only in that particular location within the town. Someone wants to develop a parcel and they may think they have vernal pools on it. They would go to the town, determine whether or not using the SAMP made the most sense for them. It might not. They have the option to go through regular DEP permitting. But let's say they choose to use the SAMP. What that allows them to do is basically any kind of development over the vernal pools that's otherwise allowed without having to conserve the vernal pool or the 250-foot zone around it. In exchange for that, they pay a fee to the town. That fee is then transferred by the town to their third-party conservation partner. And that's a formal relationship that's going to typically be a land trust. So the town acts as the middleman. They receive the money, they do the permitting, they receive the money, they transfer the money to the land trust. It's now up to the land trust to do the conservation or the mitigation for the lost vernal pools in the designated development area. And there are criteria spelled out in the SAMP for the type of conservation that's allowed. So there are requirements like the parcel that is being conserved in exchange for the lost vernal pool in the designated development area has to be a certain size. The goal is that it has 2 vernal pools on it, that it's unfragmented forested habitat, that it might be adjacent to other conserved land. And so there are criteria for conservation opportunities and options that can be used through the SAMP. It's then up to the land trust to do the work that they do, which is work with willing landowners or cultivate landowners. So we went through an extensive mapping exercise for both Orono and Topsham, used all those different conservation criteria, and came up with possible conservation opportunities in those towns that would meet all the requirements of the special area management plan. And so the landowner, the land trust then does their work and will have to face, I'm sure, all of the issues that Jessica outlined, which are very typical of issues for conservation in general. People don't understand easements. They don't understand what it means to the value of their property currently, resale value, what else they can do. It's not specific to the SAMP. Those are issues that that land trusts work on a day-to-day basis. And so a landowner can't walk into a town office of a town that's adopted the SAMP and say, I want to join the SAMP. That's really not how it works. If they have a property that has the potential to be a conservation opportunity for use in the SAMP program, their experience with the SAMP would be through the third-party conservation organization. It would be through working with the land trust. So I think it's important to recognize that what the SAMP does that hadn't been done before is it ties these two things together, economic development and conservation, in a way that, oddly enough, and against all odds, turns out to be a win for all the stakeholders. And that was the really unique element of this, I think, and the way that the group held together for the 7 years to get through all the nuts and bolts, to dot all the I's, to cross all the T's, to back the bus up, to keep moving and to move it forward again, was because we listened to each other. We heard who felt their needs weren't being met, and how we figured out how to circle it back around so that developers feel whole, the town feels whole, and conservation organizations become an active player in helping a town meet its conservation and natural resource goals. So in the end, the SAMP turned out, after 7 long years, to be this wonderful tool that hasn't been used yet. And probably some of the reasons it hasn't been used yet have to do more with the kind of project site that will be the most likely to take advantage of the SAMP itself. And one just hasn't come up yet in either of these two towns, and it likely will. And I think that the SAMP will then provide the benefits that we had hoped all along it would. But I wanted to make sure that people understood that rural landowners are a key player in the SAMP, but not as a player that signs on to the SAMP in any other way than just working with a land trust to potentially conserve, either via fee or easement, property that meets the requirements of conservation through the Vernal Pool SAMP. So I'll stop there. I know there are a lot of other people to
Great,
talk.
thanks, Liz. I just want to add a clarification that Aram put into the chat box, which is landowners can, for example, if there's a landowner who knows they have vernal pools on their property, they can approach the town and say, hey, I have vernal pools on my property, just let the town know, and then have them evaluated to see if they would meet the criteria. So that is potentially one way that, is that correct? That's a way in which a landowner could
We have a digital map in the towns that we did the mapping, and they need to be updated. And a lot of landowners who before didn't see it as an opportunity to potentially be in such a program didn't let people assess their pools. So this was also another way to get people to say, yeah, you know, I might have a very significant pool and I have some property, so I want to put it on. I would like to update my information on the map and have it be part of the evaluation that's done. So in fact, one of the things that Jess and I are really trying to do is to reach out to landowners to increase our database to make it more updated on the quality of vernal pools that are present in the town and the opportunities for the SAMP.
Okay, great. So I thought next we'd go to Rod. Rod, do you want to talk? Just say, trying to keep it brief so there's time for questions, but any observations about your involvement in this process and in Topsham?
Yeah, I'll just, I think one of my charges was to talk about why Topsham decided to go down this avenue way back when. So I'll briefly just talk about why towns, not particularly Topsham, but any town would find this to be a positive planning tool. So it kind of stems from towns that go through comprehensive planning processes. And I think every town has the statement about protecting rural character. So when you peel back that layer and really get into how do we do that, it kind of involves two things: good planning of your downtown, well thought out accommodations for development, and conversely, identifying areas for conservation. So towns that are doing those two things often look for tools to implement those two things, whether it's good development and the correct zoning for that to happen, as well as conservation and how do we do that. And that's a long process as well. When this came up, boy, what was it, 2006 maybe? It was an opportunity to gather data so that we could start the process of identifying important conservation areas within the town, and particular resources such as vernal pools. So that was kind of the beginning impetus. Really, there was no talk of special area management planning or anything like that. It was really just a data piece for us to do good planning. As that progressed, we definitely got into how do we actually protect these pools now that we've identified them? And what about the ones in the commercial area that may be right next to, say, a Target or other big box stores Topsham has? So it was kind of that dichotomy of how do we deal with these two things that aren't really, that are conflicting in nature, perhaps. So the discussion then turned into, let's chat about a mechanism to mitigate these pools in our downtown areas, and blossomed into this whole program. So it was a great process for Topsham to be involved. Other towns were involved in what Aram was talking about, the initial aerial analysis that identified the pools. And that's another, something that should be done. Actually, there's probably a number of years around that should always be updated. But I would say that that's a good idea, especially now that the SAMP exists. And what UMaine has really brought to the table there is the assistance with the landowner reach out. That was a big step for all the municipalities to really do the heavy lifting of sending out letters to every landowner and getting permission and going through that whole process. At the end of the day, I just want to also identify some folks who aren't here. Rich Rodner, former town planner and manager in Topsham. John Shattuck, he's earned his planning pin. He's an economic development person from Topsham that was involved. Mark Ireman and Evan Rickert, Evan with the town of Orono, and Mark helped craft the language that quite literally can be utilized in each town. It really is kind of a plug and play program for municipalities to kind of take what's been done already, don't reinvent the wheel, and continue how to use this tool. I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Rod. Angela, do you want to say something about the role that land trusts play?
Yes, I'm happy to. Thanks for having us here, Caroline. So from the land trust perspective, we were really happy to get involved in these discussions with the town and with developers and with experts in vernal pools and others, because the only way that we're able to do conservation is through partnerships with within the communities in which we work. We need landowners who care about conservation, and we need municipalities. They're one of our most important partners in our conservation work. Developers. So the only way we're able to conserve the important resources in our communities is through partnerships like this. And in particular, this whole SAMP process was so collaborative and did such a great job really hearing the perspectives from all of the different interests that I think we really came away with a tool that I really feel is a win-win-win-win-win. You know, the landowners who have land and want it conserved are able to do that. Developers are able to develop in areas that the towns have identified as places where they should develop. And in the past, sometimes vernal pools would get in the way of development happening where we and our communities want it to happen. So, you know, the thing I love about this tool is it allows good development to happen where we and our towns have said we want it to, but it also provides funding to help conserve the really important, more functional vernal pool habitats in our rural areas. So I just love the concept of it. It took a long time to get it right. There were a lot of hurdles to get crossed, and I just think the process was great, and we came up with a really good tool. And even though we haven't used it yet, I know there are going to be really good examples where this has a great outcome for our communities, not just a great conservation outcome, but a really great overall outcome, because we'll get good development where we want it, that it's intentional, and good conservation where we want it, that's intentional. So for land trusts, you know, for ours and around the state, it is a tool to help fund conservation, because often where vernal pools are located, they are on lands that have been identified as conservation priorities. But it's more than a funding mechanism. It's a way to assist the communities in which we work reach our goals that we're all looking for. So I'm happy to answer other questions, but it just has been a good process, and we're anxious to, to put it to the test sometime soon, I hope.
Great, thanks, Angela. And Jim Howard, Jim is on the phone, so we can't see him, but Jim, do you want to speak to your perspective as someone who's involved with development?
Sure, thank you, Caroline. You know, there are several benefits to a developer for using the SAMP program. You know, I learned over the 7 years that I hung around a bunch of environmentalists that vernal pools are an important habitat. You know, however, they sometimes get in the way of needed and responsible development. So a lot of known vernal pools are in areas such as business parks, in-town lots, commercial lots, areas where the habitat is probably not the best for vernal pool critters. Yet we try to protect those environments that are not best for their survival, and that prevents development in areas in our growth zone. Usually these vernal pools are small, and they're used by critters to travel from one location to another, so often they're temporary. However, they can be an obstacle to development when we're trying to develop lots. So I think the purpose of the SAMP is to help create an environment for these critters to thrive and survive in that's not in a business park. And by allowing a developer to mitigate a vernal pool in a town's growth zone where development should happen, we're probably preventing that developer from building in more rural areas where they probably would disrupt or destroy critical habitat good for vernal pools more often than not. So the trade-off for that mitigation of a vernal pool in the growth zone is that developers will agree to pay a mitigation fee, you know, that will go into a fund, a local fund, to conserve and preserve the appropriate habitat for vernal pool critters. And the value of the SAMP for a developer is that it allows us to bypass the DEP determination of what a vernal pool is. And it does this while allowing and helping to conserve land for vernal pool habitat. So it allows us to bypass that determination of a vernal pool as significant, which in almost all cases, the DEP would probably not allow us to mitigate a vernal pool that was of significance. So we don't have to categorize the vernal pool that's on our property. So for a mitigation fee, the vernal pool can be mitigated and the land can be developed, and money can go into a fund to preserve more appropriate land. You know, the mitigation fee would require an appraisal of the property showing its current value with the limitation of a vernal pool and its future value as if the vernal pool had been removed. The fee is then 40% of that difference in the appraised values. So if you had a $100,000 piece of property that with a vernal pool on it, and that property was worth $200,000 to a developer, if it didn't have a vernal pool on it, that's a $100,000 difference. So the fee would be $40,000. So for $40,000, you get to take a piece of property you might not be able to develop, and now you can develop that piece of property. And the SAMP seems to work best and most cost effective if the vernal pool is in a high density, high developable area, which land and commercial development are in demand. So the higher the value of the land and the greater the demand for the land, the more cost effective the mitigation fee can be, and the easier it is to absorb that fee into a development project. The most effective uses for the SAMP program for a developer probably are infill lots in downtowns, business parks, commercial lots, large housing projects. They would probably benefit from the SAMP the most. You know, other benefits to a developer with the SAMP program, and probably most noteworthy, is the fact that currently vernal pools can only be determined during a 2 to 4 week period each spring, usually April. So if you decide you want to develop a piece of property in June, and you had to get access to property to be able to do a vernal pool assessment, you probably would have to wait months the following spring before you could do that. And of course, this would slow down the development project for months. And the SAMP program allows you to mitigate a vernal pool any time of the year. The appraisal process and the fee calculation seem to be fair and manageable when I've run the numbers on it. The appraisal process as designed allows properties to be appraised town by town. So a property in Eastport would have a different value put to it than a property in downtown Portland. So it makes the fee system fair. And this allows the mitigation fee to be reasonable compared to economic demands from town to town and property to property. And also, as the economy and land values go up and down, the appraisal fee system allows the mitigation fee, because it's based on values, to go up or down with the economy. So it flows real well with that. And finally, from a developer's perspective, you know, this is a program that allows land that should be developed to get developed, you know, while supporting and protecting lands that are a better habitat for vernal pools. And also with the permitting process, it should go smoother and faster, given that the local town has delegated authority and should be able to move quicker than if you need to do your complete permitting process, you know, through DEP in the state. So I see it as for the right properties, a valuable program.
Great, thanks so much, Jim. I want to, before I jump into the questions, I just want to clarify one thing, and I think Aram, you're probably the person to do this. I'd like to clarify that when we talk about basically developing properties that are in, say, a business park that has, let's say it's infill development and there's a vernal pool on it, can you speak to the relative value of that vernal pool? My understanding is that, a vernal pool that is disconnected from other vernal pools is far less valuable. And so it has a different, it's not as valuable basically as one in a rural area. Can you speak to
Right.
that?
Sure. So you're asking about the ecological value, and I think amazingly Jim Howard answered that question. The ones that are in the areas that are going to be fully developed out.
Aram, your audio is fading out.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. What I'm saying is that you're right. Those animals may still be in the pool. They may persist for some years, but they will not be replacing themselves. They have got to have safe connectivity to vast forested areas to be not just a viable, but a robust population. And when they're surrounded by development, there's more on what we call subsidized predators like raccoons and cats and dogs and chemicals. And I think Jim really hit it that, we need to be conserving pools that are in forested landscapes that are going to work for wildlife, and let the ones that are going to be fully developed go, because they're ecologically not functioning as vernal pools anymore. I think a vernal pool should be defined as pool plus forest. Otherwise, what we have are urban wetlands, which I think are useful. Often their hydrology changes and they support green frogs and bullfrogs. And I think it's important, that a lot of urban wetlands help to mitigate pollution and sequester pollutants in the vegetation. And also, for kids that are living right in the very developed areas, there's still frogs and wildlife in those pools. So most developers, Jim has told me, don't want to fill the pool. They just don't want to get the permit to work around it or be penalized because of it. So, it is, as Angela said, win, 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 win. Because I think in most cases we're maintaining urban wetlands, which are really important. The only difference is we're not calling them vernal pools because functionally they are no longer vernal pools.
Great, thank you. So a question, can a SAMP be included in a comp plan as an objective? And are there any examples of that? Is Topsham have discussed the SAMP in its comp plan?
We did only really to identify that we currently do have it as a tool. We didn't have it as an objective. So I would say that a town should identify it as one objective among many for conservation tools that they could be looking at. Yeah.
And another question from Jim, is the developer's fee large enough to support an actual land trust land deal? For example, purchase a conservation easement?
I'll speak to that. In some cases, I think that depending on the development and how many pools are being impacted, you could in fact purchase an easement or fee. And other times it may be that the funds go towards a project that we'll have to get other funding for, but it will be an important source that will allow that conservation project to go forward, and that there are likely other conservation values on that property, and the income from the SAMP would help go towards that. So I think it can happen both ways. I think that the calculation should work out that you could do some conservation with just those funds, and other times it would go towards a larger project that we would have to do other fundraising for.
Caroline, there's another option in the SAMP for the fee. There is the fee developed through the appraisal process that Jim described well, but a town can also set a minimum fee in their ordinance. Their ordinance language could also be something like, the fee used will be developed through the appraisal process as described in section whatever, or a minimum fee of X, whichever is more. or whichever is less, if town wanted to do that way. But the town has to identify in its ordinance how it's going to assess the fee. But there are two options, and a town could employ both of them.
Okay, great. A question, will the mitigation fees for a lower grade or lower ecological value, I assume, vernal pool, be enough to conserve higher value pools that are attached to forest? And I'm assuming that the answer to that is that the value, the ecological value, isn't really factored into how much money is generated.
That's correct. What factors into the amount of money that is generated by the fee, if the town is using the appraisal method, is actually the value of the property, not the value of the vernal pool. So it's the value of the property to be developed with a vernal pool on it, which causes a constraint to the developer and would reduce the appraised value of that property. But then the appraisal method also requires that the appraiser provide the value of the property as if that vernal pool didn't exist. That will be a higher value. And then the fee is determined based on the difference between those two values. It's a percentage of the difference between those two values. So it doesn't really have to do with ecological value at all.
Okay, great.
But if I could add to that, you could also, and correct me if I'm wrong, Liz, you can also mitigate the vernal pool by providing 70 acres of land with 2 vernal pools on it and donating the land directly to the land trust.
That is right.
So if you have some land, if you had some land that you went and purchased, so whatever your mitigation fee might be calculated based on the appraisal differences, if you were able to go acquire your own 70 acres with 2 vernal pools and put that into the land trust, that would mitigate that vernal pool. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is called permittee self-mitigation. And that is an option. The only caveat is that it would have to meet all the same conservation requirements. And the land trust would have to agree to accept the property either in fee or easement. But you're absolutely right. The developer can come up with the mitigation parcel, work with the land trust, and there you go.
Great. Another question, roughly how many vernal pools exist within Topsham's growth area? Do we know that? Rod?
Roughly, it's probably less than 10 in the growth area that were mapped. It's a fairly small number that were mapped. And just to be clear too, our designated development area informed our comprehensive planning effort, where we really shrunk our growth area to really focus on development with, existing utilities and connection to infrastructure was the important element there. So yeah, that's my rough number, I guess, on that. What would it take to update that? So the previous effort from some time ago was aerial analysis. There's actually some good data now with LiDAR data that can assist in identifying pools as well. That could help that. So that takes an analysis from a qualified aerial analysis person. I don't know the terminology there, but that would be what would need to happen on that. So it would be hiring somebody to conduct that analysis. And that really just is the first blush of that effort of identifying the pools, because at that point, the potential vernal pools, and then there's the on ground. And what we did in the past was the citizen science effort, where a ROM came down and trained, I don't know how many people a ROM, I mean, it was quite a few, of Topshamites to go trudge through wherever we had permission to then do 2 years of checking the pools twice each year. Is that correct?
Right, that's right. Yeah, and that's why we have a limit of map vernal pools, because it was permission only from landowners. And And Jessica also studied this. Some of the landowners who said no, just said no, not because they were anti-vernal pools, but because they didn't have any intention of developing or doing anything to harm the pools. So they said no. We learned that through Jessica's PhD research. So that's why we're looking towards the SAMP to help us bring more landowner pools onto our maps.
Somehow I should be convincing Topsham to do trout surveys on streams and just fish most of the time and see if there's trout there, but.
So I think that is the last of the questions. So is it fair to say that basically the website of Pools and People is the best place to send people to get more information about the SAMP?
Yes.
So I will send a link around to that website and specifically to the section that addresses the SAMP. And I guess I would add, I know that we here at Candidates River Education Alliance, we're planning to do a big night event next spring. And I think that's a great way to get people excited about vernal pools and understanding the role that they play in the landscape and more broadly in sort of the ecology of our landscape. And that same website of Pools and People has great information about how to train yourself, how to get trained on how to identify significant vernal pools and how to identify all the little critters that are in them. And so I think, I guess I would encourage folks to get involved in a big night or create a big night in your community as sort of a first step to getting people involved. So I think that's it for questions. I just want to thank all of you. It's a big panel that we have. Oh, someone wants to hear a little more about the wetland winter potlucks. Is that a citizen education tool?
Jessica?
Well, that was one of the suggestions of the landowners we talked to as a way to create a space to learn more about the SAMP in a way that was fun and connecting neighbors. So if anyone's interested in a wetland winter potluck, the idea was that we could snowshoe out to a great spot and have some time together as one way to communicate. So we're open to other suggestions and other options for engaging with and building relationships with landowners.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all, our panelists, for showing up, and to all the folks who showed up to listen. And I'll send a link to the recording tomorrow or the day after. Everybody have a great night.
Thank you, folks, for organizing this, and thanks everybody for attending. It was great to see your names at least.
All right. Take care, everyone. Good night.